All right, says I'm live. Are you hearing me? Make sure before I start saying anything important. No sound coming through? Start saying it. I can hear me. Yep, I just unmuted my computer real quick. Hey guys, so this is the first of what we're going to try for at least a couple of weeks here as just the Meatgistics live stream. Very different vibe from the Walton's Inc. live streams that are for giveaways, drawings, and all the fun stuff. We do those to kind of connect with our Walton's customers. We're doing these far more focused at connecting with our Meatgistics users and those who are really interested in learning more about meat processing. Cover, everything from smoke schedules, humidity, and the first one we're planning on doing is something that I talk about a ton, and that is protein extraction. So protein extraction is what allows us to hang our snack sticks, our cured sausage, anything like that, in our smokers and not have the fat render out of the meat. So when we're creating a smoke environment, we're doing a couple things. One, we're making it basically the perfect environment for botulism, all sorts of nasty things to grow in there. That's part of the reason for the cure. The cure helps fight that. But the other thing we're doing is we really are creating a perfect environment for fat to render out of the meat and run right down. Okay, yeah, I should address that. Sorry. Ryan Jones wants to know, is that a new hat color? And yes, it is. These just came in today. These are the new Walton's black hats. I've been wanting a black hat again for a long time. Finally found one that feels like it fits pretty good at least. So yeah, we will get these up on the website fairly shortly. And I probably jumped into things too quickly, but thank you all for joining us. Like I said, we're going to try these. We're not expecting these to have the same viewership as we do on our Walton's ones. I mean, those we're intentionally trying to draw everybody in. We want you guys to enjoy these as well, but those are a separate thing. These are really more for the people, like I said, who are wanting to learn about meat processing. All right, so back into what I was talking about, and that's when you hang a snack stick. So what you run the risk of is your fat rendering out of the meat. So when that happens, your fat is going to push out of the meat. It's going to separate from the muscle and work its way to the outside. Once that happens, it's going to either get trapped between the meat and the casing, and from that you can get those nasty little grease pockets. They really just look nasty. They don't necessarily create any huge issues, but you also can have the fat just drip all the way down and out the casing, create a mess on your floor, and more importantly, you don't have any good fat in your snack stick to help you out with taste, with moisture, so you end up with a dry, shriveled product. So you can kind of see that on this snack stick. It's very dried. So what's going into protein extraction? What happens when you get it and you don't get it? So we've got some B-roll for you here, and we're gonna go switch over to some of that, and I'm just gonna talk through what's happening during these parts of the process. Patrick, can you bring up the first one? It's the first grind.
Yeah, I got you.
So we're just grinding things through a 3/8 plate. This really is where we start extracting the protein, because the protein, you're using salt and mechanical action to get to the center of that muscle. And as you can see there, that's a super thick 3/8 cut. So that's breaking the whole muscle down into smaller pieces. But if we tried to get protein to extract from that right there, we'd really, really struggle. So we need to do something else to it. We need to get it into a smaller piece. So let's cut on over to the second grind. And as you can see here, we've got much finer strands. Now, that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to make it a lot easier when we mix in our seasoning and other additives for the seasoning, and specifically the salt, to get to as much of the protein as possible, because that's what we want. That salt is going to help us get to the center of that muscle and solubilize that protein and make it easier to extract. If we tried to do this when it was big and chunky, we'd really struggle. And if we try to do it without salt, we might not get it at all. There it is. Yep, sorry, go to binder. Well, we'd want to go to the mixing first. Sorry about this, guys. I should have labeled those. Okay. And now my computer's acting up. Yep. So there's a couple of different ways we can go about mixing. Probably the most common is still by hand, but this is where we're using a meat mixer to do it. So we load up our meat mixer with enough meat to make sure that those paddles can create some mechanical energy as it's going through them. We want it grabbing the meat and forcing it apart and together. We want it working it. So we're kind of stressing those proteins and starting to force it to really bind together. As you can probably see here, where more of the seasoning has already come in contact with the meat, it's already starting to extract better. And again, that's from the salt content of the meat. If you can see where there is no seasoning mixed, can you pause that real quick, Patrick? When you're trying to work the meat where there is no seasoning in contact with it, you're not going to get much of protein extraction. Now, you certainly can get some, but it's not going to be to the point that you're going to need when you were trying to make a snack stick, a summer sausage, cured sausage, really anything that we want protein extraction on. Generally, when I'm using a meat mixer like that, I'm doing larger than a 12-pound batch. If I'm doing something like a little test batch, I'm doing 5 to 7 pounds, I really do just use my hands. And the reason for that is that I don't have to clean a mixer that way. I like to do a method where I get my hands and I kind of close my fists. I go in with an open fist, I close it, and I push forward. I try to get as much movement on my hands as possible because I want to work those proteins as much as I can in as little time as possible. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, usually the meat's pretty cold and I just don't want my hands in cold meat. I have poor circulation in my hands or something, so it hurts after a while. And two, I want that meat to stay in that cold range as much as possible. Obviously, we've added cure to it, so we're not quite so worried about it growing nasty things, but we still want to keep it out of that danger zone as much as possible. So beyond mixing and making sure that you're getting the good mechanical energy and you're making sure that the salt and seasoning is coming in contact with as much of the protein as possible, what else can you do to get good protein extraction? And one of the best things you can do is to add a binder. Now, binder can mean a couple of different things. When we're talking about cured sausage, we're generally talking about either Sure-Gel or we're talking about Superbind. Carrot fiber is something that we discovered about 2 or 3 years ago and we absolutely love, but it really does work best for a fresh sausage, like a bratwurst, an Italian, something like that. The reason it's not a great fit for a cured sausage is that carrot fiber is trying to hold in as much water as it can. So it holds up to 26 times its weight in water, and it's going to do everything it can to keep the moisture in your product. Well, snack stick, a summer sausage, and even a cured sausage to a certain extent is a semi-dried product. We want to cook out a percentage of that water. So you're kind of fighting against yourself there. Sure-Gel also adds actual protein. It has a protein in it, so it makes extracting the proteins easier because it is adding more protein to your mix. So if you're adding carrot fiber, there's no protein there, it's just carrot fiber. Sure-Gel is increasing the amount of protein in your meat, so it makes extracting those proteins easier. Superbind is a mix of carrot fiber and potato starch. Superbind is one of those things that just, I might not fully understand it, but it sure does a great job. What it's doing is it forms a gel at the exact same temperature that meat starts to sweat. I would use Sure-Gel. I do use Superbind quite often if I'm doing something like a chicken sausage, something where I do want it to hold a ton of moisture. For a snack stick, something like that, probably not the best bet. I would either use Sure-Gel, or another one that's nice and inexpensive is something called soy protein blend. When you look at soy protein blend, it almost looks like oatmeal or a cereal, but once you've mixed it in and cooked it, there will be you won't notice that texture. It will be 100% dissolved into the meat, or you won't notice it. So let me quickly just jump over and look at chat, see if there's any questions on what we've talked about so far. Yep, work those pecans off. Lynn, those were amazing. We ate those like incredible. So Greg is asking, how important is the initial coarse grind? We typically grind as much as 400 pounds of meat during deer processing and just grind on the small plate right away. So you're stressing your proteins there pretty hard. You're also asking a lot from your grinder. So if you're going from large chunks, just big enough to fit down to your throat, through a 1/8 plate, you're really, really working that protein at the plate. You'll want to give it an easy way through on the first one, and that's that 3/8 plate. Just let it, look how fast that's going. It's going right through, and then on the next one, it'll get caught up at the plate a little bit, but not quite as it would if you're using a little 1/8 plate. So people who've done things a certain way for forever, if you're getting a result you're really, really happy with, I don't know that I would say, hey, change, definitely do this. But a better finished product really would be going through a 3/8, even a 3/16, and then a 1/8 plate. So Papa Sop says, Sure-Gel is great, need to order more. Absolutely, that is, luckily I always have everything on stock here, but that is definitely one thing that if I was making sausage at my home, that I would add to every batch of cured meat. So what it's doing basically is I always tell people, it's increasing your margin of error. If you don't get the best protein extraction in the world, but you add Sure-Gel, you have a way better chance of being happy with your finished product. And when I say happy with the finished product, I am meaning a few things. I'm meaning that it's not going to have this wrinkly, kind of deflated appearance. I mean that there's going to be more fat in there, so it's going to be more flavorful, because as we all know, the fat in sausage or any food really, as you're eating it, it melts, coats your mouth, and helps you experience the flavor longer and more intensely. So we're adding our Sure-Gel right there. We're doing, I think if I remember correctly, a 20-pound batch here. We were adding some cayenne, hot extra pepper, and then here just adding the water. And we've mixed our Sure-Cure. You can see that water has a little bit of pink tint to it. So we've mixed our Sure-Gel or Sure-Cure in with the water there. And there we go. We're just spinning it and gonna let those paddles do the work for us so that our hands don't have to. So that's the 20-pound Weston meat mixer. both the 44-pound Weston meat mixer and the Walton's 50-pound new meat mixer hook up to certain grinders. I can say for sure that the new Walton's grinders will work with the Weston 44-pound and ours. It appears that at least the Weston Pro Series 22 works with ours as well. As soon as we can get more of those Pro Series in stock, I'll test some more just to make absolutely sure, but it looks like that shouldn't be a problem. When we're mixing in meat or mixing in cheese, we really do like to add our cheese during the last minute, 2 minutes. Commercial sales, the person who knows more about making sausage than anyone else I know in this building, tells me that that's really not important. Says that the cheese is not going to go ahead and smear during the mixing process, but it's just one of those things that I have kind of always done. And then obviously, if you're adding a cure accelerator like encapsulated citric acid, you want to add that during the last 60 seconds of the mixing process. And the reasoning behind that with encapsulated citric acid is it's got a coating on the outside that's designed not to melt until it gets to 130 degrees. It will, however, rupture if it experiences too much jostling, I guess, too much mechanical action against it, too much crushing, too much pressure. And then you're going to have a citric acid interacting with your meat too early in the process. And that's going to do something called denaturing your proteins. If you've ever tried doing this and you've added the encapsulated citric acid too early, you might notice that you just can't get the meat to bind well together. It's just as you're trying to form it into a sausage-like roll, it's just going to fall apart. So what we're eventually, can you go back just a couple seconds on that, Patrick? So when we're mixing, this is what we're ending up wanting to see. As we pick up a handful of it and we start pulling it apart, we want it to stretch. We want it to have elasticity to it. We don't want it to just break. Even that there is decent protein extraction, but if we had not added a binder, I would keep mixing with that. You really, really want it to pull, to stretch wide. And a couple other things, as you can kind of see there, but you'll be more familiar with it from home. When you're using these kind of mixers with the paddles, you're going to get something we call fat smearing. You're going to lose a decent amount of particle definition. If you can switch back to me, Patrick. When we do certain processes and use commercial equipment, this is a sausage, a dry cured sausage. You can see the huge fat particles in this. This is because, let me see if I can, there we go. You can see the white bits all throughout there. We ground our fat and our lean separately, and we used a commercial planetary mixer. So that allowed us to get protein extraction without getting any fat smear. In fact, the first time I used one of these, I was doing it with one of our commercial sales guys, and he's like, okay, well, we're done. I'm like, no, that's nowhere near the protein extraction that we need. And he kind of laughed. He's like, yeah, I forget you don't do this. He's like, pick that up. Picked it up, started pulling it apart. It was incredibly stretchy. I mean, really, really good protein extraction, but still very clear fat particle definition. It was really kind of eye-opening. But yeah, that's sort of a side note. Lynn says, when do you add seasoning to the mix? I've been doing it before the second grind. So I think one of the things we really do need to do is do a side-by-side where we make 2 batches, we add one in between the first and second grind, and then do another one, which is how I've almost always done it. And that is just by doing all of my grinding and then doing all of my mixing. At the time I mix, that's when I add my seasonings. The main reason that I don't add my seasoning or anything else in between the 2 grinds is once we've started adding salt to the mix, we're going to start extracting those proteins. That means anything that gets left behind in that head, in the throat, on the auger, in the plate, it's going to start setting up a lot harder. It's going to be much more difficult to clean, especially if you can't get to it right away. And a lot of the times I'm not getting to it for, sometimes an hour or more. And at that point, that meat is caked on there and it becomes difficult to clean. So I just do everything through my grinder. I go into a poly pan or a meat lug or a meat mixer, and then I add my seasonings and just mix. Excuse me. So Kevin asks, when adding water to a cured product, do you increase the amount when using Sure-Gel? So I would always recommend you add water. But yes, you absolutely can add more water if you're using Sure-Gel. I would say if you're doing a 25-pound batch and you're adding no water at all, or I'm sorry, no Sure-Gel at all, the max I would use would be a 1.5 pints of water. I wouldn't really want to add more than that. If I'm using Sure-Gel, I will add up to 1.5 quarts. Just shy of 2 quarts. Same thing if I'm doing a super bind. I think soy protein blend, I'd cut out a little bit less than that, maybe 1.25 quarts. So the advantage to adding more water is that it is going to make the mixing and the stuffing process, definitely the stuffing process, a lot easier. The downside though is that, again, these are dry or semi-dried products. So any extra water we add in, we are going to have to cook out, or at least a portion of it. So if you're using Sure-Gel, yeah, I would say go ahead and feel free to add up to 1.5 quarts of water to a 25-pound batch. Papa Sop says, much better finished product using the Sure-Gel. Great product, good mouthfeel. He did that intentionally. It is good palate appeal, I believe is what we've determined the correct term is. William Hof says, how do I keep my casings from debonding from my hot sticks? Also to eliminate shrinkage. Venison and pork shoulder 50-50. So a couple things there. With snack sticks, I assume that's what you mean when you say hot sticks. Ice baths are one of those really, really weird things. When we're making snack sticks and we're making summer sausage, it's basically the same process. It's just a different seasoning we're using. Sometimes it's the exact same seasoning, and we're stuffing it into a different casing, right? Ice baths are really, really important for both of those, but they're important for different reasons. With a summer sausage, getting it into an ice bath is going to help the casing separate from the meat. When we're talking about a snack stick with smoked collagen, it's going to help keep it on the meat. So what I would tell you is the first thing, make sure that you're putting it into an ice bath, not a cold water bath. You want that to be like 50-50 ice and water. You want to get it as cold as possible, as quickly as possible. Then, before you move it into a cooler overnight, make sure you're leaving it out at least an hour at room temperature. That will definitely help. Then don't leave it in the cooler for more than 12 hours. Coolers are usually, or refrigerators, which is what most people at home are going to use, are usually somewhere in like the 40 to 55% humidity range. Well, these have just been cooked out of a good amount of water. They're going to try to absorb some of that water back. So then after you take them back out of the cooler, leave them out, single roll or row on a table, something like that, for at least another hour, hour and a half. You want them to have just be exactly at room temperature when you go to vac seal them. If you try to vac seal too cold or definitely too hot meat, you're going to get moisture in your vac bag. And I've seen it happen a few times even with what we've done. You go to take something out and you look, it almost looks like there's water in your vac bag. That's because I'm in a rush and I, try to vac seal them too early. Patrick's seen it. We've taken them out of that, laid them out, dried them off, tried to fix it, but at that point that casing's peeling off. You've kind of, to a certain degree, ruin your product. Also use a binder, and I mean, 50-50 pork butts and venison I know is the best a lot of people can do, because pork fat is surprisingly hard to find. But if we consider that a pork butt is, untrimmed pork butt is 30% fat, right? That's on the high end, but it's totally reasonable. It should be in that range. Your deer is what, like 5% fat, depending on what you're using, less than that. You're at 15% fat, so you're at the lower end of what we would say is acceptable for a snack stick. What I would recommend you do is try going and finding some pork fat. Instead of doing a 50-50 mix, just do one batch that's 75% deer, 25% pork fat, and see if that fixes your problem. Because if you don't have enough fat, or if the fat cooks out, you're gonna end up with wrinkly, or it can separate as well from just not having that bond of the fat. So chef asked what humidity would be best. So that's different for different sections of the smoking process. I assume you mean the smoking process and not the holding process. If you mean holding in a cooler overnight, something with a lower humidity, but again, no one's gonna have that at home. For the smoking process, we generally recommend, we generally recommend that you do at least a half-hour drying phase at the beginning. So at home, that's normally just your dampers wide open and adding no humidity. After that, we recommend you close down the dampers and you start adding humidity. If you have a way to control the amount of humidity that's added, I would say first hour, somewhere in the 50% range, and then keep ramping it up. And then at the end, like your cooking cycle, once you've gotten past as much smoke as you want to do, get as close to 100% humidity as you can. For people at home, the best way to do that, I don't know where it is, I've got a chamois somewhere around here. It's this blue aqua towel. It's like a chamois material, don't worry about it. I put that in our PK100, let it fold out or hang over both the sides of a very large oversized water pan, and it completely emptied something that was at least a gallon, probably, maybe a little under a gallon, in a 4-hour smoke cycle. So those aqua towels, chamois material, absolutely works great. If you can't find that, or you don't want to deal with the mess, because that does create a bit of a mess, automotive sponges, that increases, so you get a big oversized water bowl, stick your automotive sponges in that. If you ever looked closely at a sponge, it's got tons of extra like little runnels, little caves, little spaces in it. So that's increasing the surface area that you can evaporate off of, that the air in your smoker will allow to evaporate off of. So that definitely can help increase the relative humidity of your smoker. We did tests. Adding a water pan gives you like I think it was a 7 to 8% boost, somewhere in there. We'll just say 10 to be generous % boost in relative humidity. The sponges, I think, was close to 50, and that aqua towel was close to 60 something extra humidity above whatever the natural humidity of the air is on that day. Never seen beer in a plastic bottle. Nope, this is a Diet Canada Dry. As I said, these are going to be very different from our Walton's Inc. live streams. Much more to the point, controlled, on point, and about meat. So yeah, Chef, you are talking about the holding process. Let me do some research on what commercial processors would do. I assume you're asking that because you have a way to manage the humidity in your cooler. Let me do some research on that, and I will get back. So Lynn's asking, did I want to cover the basic drying and smoke schedule for snack sticks for summer sausage? Not necessarily in this. We can do that in future ones, but that's not really a protein extraction topic, I guess. We definitely can do something on that. We once tried a long time ago where a lot of that B-roll that you just saw, we already had shot, was from, we tried to go from A to Z on, I think it was either snack sticks or summer sausage. Can't remember what it was. We wanted to do that during a live stream, but all of that equipment is A, loud, and B, we'd be moving all around. So we just shot it ahead of time and then talked through it as we went. So we could do something like that with the smoking process. Just shoot everything ahead of time. In fact, that might be a good future topic for one of these, our smoke schedules and the differences for different meat products. That's actually a good idea. We'll definitely do that. Ted Pawlowski says, I have a large smoker. What is your thoughts on a home vaporizer for humidity? Ted, I love that idea. Here's your issue. A humidifier is only giving you a way to keep adding humidity. It's not giving you a way to measure it and adjust. So if you wanted to start using that towards the end of your cycle where you just want to get as much humidity in there as possible, and for anyone who doesn't know, the reason you'd want to get more humidity in your smoker is that we're trying to fight off the stall by adding humidity. Sorry, part of what we're doing is trying to fight off the stall. The stall is when the evaporation coming off your meat, the evaporation energy equals or even sometimes exceeds the thermal processing energy that's going in. Think about it when you're sweating on a hot day. That's designed to keep your skin cool. It's the same thing happening to the sausage. It's just making it harder to heat the sausage. So as we add more humidity, it makes it harder for that water to evaporate off the skin of the sausage. Same thing with your skin. That's why, part of the reason why a humid day feels so much hotter than a dry day. So yeah, if you wanted to go with the last section, just the straight cooking section with something like that, that would work. Early on, there's problems of adding too much humidity, which can then create streaking in your sausage. It'll look like you have vertical lines running down, and that will be where the smoke was trying to adhere, but there was too much humidity and it just started running down and clearing the smoke off the stick. So Papa Sup says, personally, I use the same schedule for both. I mean, they can be really close. A lot of it depends on what type of smoker you have. People who are using like a pellet smoker, you're not going to be able to make much difference in it. They're going to be basically the same thing. We're lucky enough to have a PK. We can be pretty fine-tuned with that, including airflow with the vents at the top and the bottom. But yeah, some of it is the exact same. It's just one takes longer because it is larger. I worked in a shop with a steam generator attached to the smoker. Is there a home version? Kevin, I don't know. It's not something that we carry or that I'm aware of, but I would guarantee you that it is probably out there. Can I use a kitchen mixer or KitchenAid mixer for extraction? So Dennis, we used the Hamilton Beach commercial. Sorry, I was looking over there because it used to be over there, but I gave it away. We used the Hamilton Beach commercial 8-quart planetary mixer, which is probably very similar to the KitchenAid you're talking about. And yeah, you can. The problem is that the biggest bowl that it had, which was, again, I think it said it was 8 quarts or something like that. We could only get like 4 pounds of meat in there, maybe 5 pounds of meat, and get it to actually spin and get us our protein extraction. Now, it did a good job. it definitely got the proteins to extract. But I mean, that is a fairly small batch, and it did take, I think from the moment we made the right adjustments, I think it took like 5-6 minutes to get 4 or 5 pounds to protein extraction. So depending on the batch size you're using or making, yeah, you can, but it might just be quicker to just do it with a meat mixer. Chef says also about the home vaporizer. Is there a unit that can operate under smoking temperatures, or would that have to be piped in? Yeah, it'd have to be piped in. So for something like what we were talking about, large bowl of water, sponges, towels, something like that, that's relying on the heat inside your smoker. So you would have to have something that would heat it elsewhere, or could you atomize it somewhere and then send it in? But yeah, no, I would think you would want to do something where you have a reservoir that adds heat to it as it steams, goes in through the bottom of the smoker, and then rises up through it. So that would be my best bet. All right, so I think I've got everyone's question. I think I'm happy with the explanation of what protein extraction is and why it's so important. I don't know if people are a little bit behind, so we'll hang out here for another couple minutes, make sure there weren't any other questions for people to answer. And I like the fact that I saw a few people say that they like this format. That's what we're trying to do here, trying to get people as much information on meat processing as they want. Every once in a while when we're doing those live streams for Walton's, I look in there and I see some serious questions, and I kind of lament the fact that we're not really focusing in on that. So I just wanted to create something that was really just for this. Plus, these can now live on YouTube, so if people have questions, I can say, hey, we covered that in here. Just please go watch. We answered a bunch of questions. So I was thinking about a steaming unit for cloths or tablecloths. Ooh. That's interesting. I hesitate to say this, Chef, but I think you specifically are going to want to be real careful with that. Inspectors get pretty touchy about using things for meat processing when they're not designed for that. So just something to think about. Okay, so Dennis, yeah, if you're doing small batches, no problems. Definitely go ahead and use your KitchenAid. The one that we had the most success with was like the dough hook, I think, surprisingly. I thought it was going to be the leaf-shaped one, but the dough hook definitely worked the best in my memory. Can't always trust that, though. So do some experimentation, but yeah, start with the dough hook, because I do believe that's the one that we had the most success with. All right, James Hoover says, would you recommend grinding the pork fat with the venison for summer sausage and snack stick, or grind separately, then mix it in? So James, that's a great question. If I was doing something where I really cared about the particle definition, like a salami, certain types of pepperoni, I would definitely grind them separately. But when I'm doing a snack stick, a couple of things are going to happen. One, I'm going to be getting protein extraction with my mixing, and I'm using something like a horizontal mixer. So I'm not going to retain that particle definition during processing anyways. So I'm just going to grind them together for a couple of reasons. One, ease. It's one less thing I have to think about. And two, when I'm grinding the pork fat and the venison together, I'm mixing it in better during the whole process. So that's less time I have to spend while I'm mixing, worrying about the pork fat getting evenly distributed throughout all the venison. JLN Yardbird says, was awesome that you had CZ on a podcast. How about some local hunters? There's some interesting guys out there. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and shoot us an email over to podcast@waltonsinc.com. And speaking of Daniel, you're going to see more from him with us. He's got his own podcast called Hunt, Fish, Eat. Definitely recommend you guys check that out. You'll see a bunch of Walton stuff on there. We're going to be working pretty closely with him. He might even be in here to do some stuff for his podcast, and he's got a YouTube channel now, Hunt, Fish, Eat. But we've offered him the use of our studio kitchen. So awesome. All right, so I'll hang around for one more minute, make sure everyone's cool, and then we will go ahead and get out. I'm glad people got some benefit from it. And like I said, we're not expecting to have the same draw on this as we are on the Waltons, but no matter how the viewership is, we'll stick with it for a couple of months at least. And then if it's if it's the same 20 guys every time, we'll probably try something else. But if we can grow this a little bit, we will absolutely continue doing this. Yeah, Jalen, I'm calling you Jalen, but it's JLN Yardbird. Great guns. He, hopefully next time he came down, he said he'd bring one of the Scorpions, and we can go shoot that, which I am really excited for. So, all right, guys, thanks. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.